Trigonometric functions. As you can see on this first page here, there is some definitions and some identities and common angles. These are really helpful and important. I would write them down on a flashcard or a formula sheet. So let's get started on solving example 1. So whenever we're talking about coordinates on a unit circle or a Cartesian coordinate, we always refer to the order pair as x comma y. Well, when we are talking about the unit circle, x becomes cosine and y becomes sine. So in this first one here, it says if x equals, if the order pair x comma y is any point other than the origin, and of course we know what the origin is, it's the center of the graph. It's where x is 0, y is 0. On the terminal side of the angle alpha in standard position, we'll have this formula here, where r is equal to the square root of x squared plus y squared. So we are trying to figure out what is y over r, x over r. Well, let's talk a little bit about what r is. R, if we wish to draw a right triangle has a 90-degree angle, right? The longest side is r. And then we have our adjacent, we call it a, or just adjacent. Sometimes it's called x. And then we have our opposite, which is called sometimes y. And it is sine. So whenever we talk about these, you can label it like this if you want. And the Pythagorean Theorem is what most of us remember the most from algebra when we talk about a right triangle. So this is in the same format. So whenever we talk about the longest side here, r, which is hypotenuse, which is sometimes called c, we say that the two other sides, opposite and adjacent, will add up to give me r, right? That makes sense. Well, now we need to determine what our new order pair is. Again, I said cosine became x, sine became y. So we need to determine what is y over r. Well, y over r means opposite over hypotenuse, so that's my sine. X over r is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is my cosine. So this is just recognizing what our identities, formulas are, which is given here on the front page. So let's talk a little bit again. So tangent, we know, is y over x, which means it's sine over cosine. And if you'll go up here to these identities, and you'll notice that, let me get that out there, that cosecant is the inverse of sine, and secant is the inverse of cosine. Well, then that means cotangent is the inverse of tangent. So these are very, very important, guys. I would write them down for sure and memorize them. So let's go to example 2. Example 2 asks us to assume that alpha is an angle in standard position whose terminal side contains the point 4, 4. So that's our order pair that's on the unit circle. Find the exact values following the functions. Well, in order to find the exact value for sine, cosine, cotangent, and so far, we have to know what r is because we weren't given r, we was just given x, y. So r, we're going to apply that rule or that definition that was given at the beginning. R equals the square root of x squared plus y squared. And when we know what x is, it's 4. And we know what y is, it's 4. So now we take 4 squared is 16 plus 4 squared, which is 16. We add them together, we get 32. So I got square root of 32. However, we're not going to leave it in that format if you can factor anything out of the root. If you cannot factor anything out of the root, then leave it alone. But in this case here, I see that I have 4 times 4 times 2 gives me 32. Well, then that means I know what the square root of 4 is. I know what the square root of 4 is, but the square root of 2 does not factor out. So let's go ahead and clean this up. Square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 2. So now I have the answer of 4 square root of 2. So now I know what r is. I'm going to highlight it right quick. So now I can start answering the questions. So for sine here, we know that sine is y over r. Well, from the order pair here, we have 4 for y, and r is 4 square root of 2. In the rule of math, you're not allowed to have a fraction in the denominator as your final answer. So we're going to have to do an extra step here. But before I do it, I noticed that I have 4 here and 4 here, and they reduce in division, they reduce down to 1. So I'm going to go ahead and do that step, make it a little bit less work. Now, I got a square root of 2 in the denominator. In order for me to give the final answer, the root cannot be in the denominator. So rule, I know that square root of 2 times square root of 2 will give me square root of 2 squared. And when we talked about the power rules, we said we can take the radicand, raise it to the power, in this case is 2, raise it to the root, which is 2. 2 divides 2 is 1, gives me 2 to the first, which we just write as 2. Knowing that, that means I can multiply this denominator by that square root of 2. But remember, what you do to one part, you do to the other. So now I have 1 times that square root of 2 over 2. So I know my answer for sine. And up here at the top, when we was talking about the identities and definitions, we said that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So I already know what cosecant is, right? So I'm gonna have to do a little bit of work because watch what happens. We're gonna take the reciprocal. That means we flip it. So now I get 2 over square root of 2. We can't have that. So we're gonna have to do some math. We're gonna multiply by the square root of 2, top and bottom. So now I get 2 square root of 2 over 2. And what happens? My 2's reduce down to 1 and 1 times square root of 2. So now I know what cosecant is. Oops, let me fix that. I was trying to highlight it. All right, so let's highlight it. All right, now let's find cosine. Well, cosine of alpha is x over r. Well, we know what x is because the order pair said it's 4. We know what r is because we solved it and we got 4 square root of 2. This one works out nice and pretty. This doesn't always happen because you don't always get the same x and y value in an order pair. But this one here works out so just like the sine did. We're going to reduce the 4's. Now I got 1 over square root of 2. I'm going to multiply top and bottom by square root of 2. And then I get square root of 2 over 2. So it just worked out this one time because they are nice numbers. So the secant we know is the reciprocal of cosine. So we're going to do the same thing to it. We're going to flip the cosine. And of course, we can't have that root in the denominator. So we're going to multiply top and bottom by that square root. So now I have 2 square root of 2 over 2. The 2's reduced, leaves me the square root of 2. So I know what my secant is. Now let's find our tangent. Our tangent is x over y. So that one's not going to be too bad. Tangent of alpha is x over, excuse me, I said that wrong. My apologies. It's y over x because it's sine over cosine. So I'm going to get 4 over 4 because that's the order pair. Well, that reduces down to 1. That made life so easy right there, didn't it? Don't always happen that way. Now let's find cotangent. Well, cotangent is a reciprocal of tangent. Well, tangent's just 1, so that means cotangent's just 1 because no matter how you flip 1, it's just going to be 1 over 1. So that is finding all the functions given. Finding the standard position whose terminal side contains those points. All right, so let's do example 3. Example 3, we are going to find the exact value. And you don't need a calculator for this one. However, you do need to know the unit circle. So I'm going to try to draw. Bear with me on my drawing. Draw a unit circle. Okay, so now whenever I put in my degrees, I know we start at 0 degrees here, we get 90 degrees here, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and then we end with 360 degrees. That's a complete circle. And that negative sign tells me the circle is going the opposite direction. You know, usually we go in this direction, right, when we're making the circle. All right, so now where's 270 degrees? It's right here on the y-axis. Well, on the y-axis, the x-intercept is always 0. And on the 270 degrees, my y is a -1. Up here on the 90 degrees, again, x is 0, but y is 1. So now I know what it is. All I need to know is what is cosine. Well, cosine is x, therefore my answer is 0. Example 4. Example 4 says, evaluate the trigonometric function at a quadratic angle or state its expression is undefined. So what we're going to have to do is go to our unit circle. I put it right here. Let me make it a little bit smaller. We can get on the same page. Maybe. One second. Okay, so I can't get it any smaller. Get too small, you won't be able to read it very good. But let's look at it. If we say tangent of 3 pi halves, we're going to look, where is 3 pi halves on the unit circle? And we're going to come and see that it's right here. Okay. And we know that tangent is y over x. So it wants to know its expression. So we know it fell on the y-axis. We know the order pair, we get -1 for y and 0 for x. And this is undefined. This is undefined because of mathematics. You cannot have 0 in the denominator. Anytime you have 0 in the denominator, it's undefined. But if you get 0 in the numerator, well, that's equal to 0. That's true. Okay, so that'll be a 0 statement. Okay, so let's go to our next one. And we're going to want to use this unit circle in this next one. So we are looking for the exact value. We are given sine 2 pi over 3. So let's find 2 pi over 3. I found it's right here, 2 pi over 3. And sine, remember, is the y value in the order pair. So its exact value is the square root of 3 over 2. Number 6, however, let's find number 6. It says find the exact value of this quotient. So we have sine of pi over 3 and cosine of pi over 3. And we're dividing sine by cosine. So let's find pi over 3. And we find it's right here. This is the order pair. And I might have to zoom in just a little bit for you to see where I'm talking about. So the order pair we get, remember, x is cosine, y is sine. So I'm going to get square root of 3 halves divided by the half. So now to find its exact value, I'm going to use algebra or basic math. Actually, basic math. We got a fraction divided by fraction. So anytime you divide fractions, it can be a fraction and a whole number. Just anytime a fraction is involved in division, we're going to apply a certain rule. So I have square root of 3 halves. I'm going to just rewrite it where I can read it better. Divided by that half. The rule is we're going to keep the first, change the operation, and flip the second. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to keep the first, square root of 3 over 2. We're going to change from division to multiplication and flip the second. And when I do that, now I got multiplication going on in fractions. And whenever you have multiplication going on in fractions, we ask ourselves, can we reduce anything from the top versus bottom? But when I look at it, I see that I have a 2 on top and a 2 on bottom. So I know those two will reduce and it goes into itself once. Now I got 1 times square root of 3 all over 1, but we don't write our final answer with the 1 in the denominator. So therefore, that's my final answer. Okay, so let's do number 7. Number 7 asks us for the exact value of this. So we're going to use our calculator on this. Just make sure you're in degrees mode. And when you type sine in, you go sine 51 degrees. My calculator puts in parentheses, so make sure and close your parentheses. You get, and it said round to 4 decimal places, 0.7771, which just is 10 thousandths. That's what that decimal place is called. So now number 8 says we'll use the calculator on this one to find the exact values. We had talked earlier in the semester about degrees, minutes, and seconds. So this should be a refresher for you. So the only difference here now is we're involving secant. All right. I have a negative 44 degrees plus, remember, we said that for every 1 degree, whoops, let me spell that right. For every 1 degree, we have 60 minutes. Okay. So knowing that, I can take that 3 minute and divide it by 60 minutes, and the minutes reduce, right? And I end up with degree. Plus, I got seconds here. So I got 12 seconds, and I'm going to divide that by 3,600 seconds. And then those units reduce. So most of you will just write it like this, and that's fine too. All right. So in math, in order to add or subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. In this case here, my common denominator is 3,600. I went ahead and put a 1 under the 44. However, if you type this in the calculator will figure it out. But it's very important that you understand this and why this process is. So I noticed 3,600 is my least common denominator. So it means I need to multiply this by 60 and this by 60. Multiply this by 3,600 and this by 3,600. And then what I get the fractions I need. Again, you're probably going to just type this in your calculator and get the whole entire answer without having to do all this work, but it's important to understand how you got the answer you got. All right, so now I got 3 times 60, 180, that's 12. All right, all over 3,600. So what I got a negative 158,400 plus 180 plus 12. So I get a negative 15 and 15,828 all divided by 3,600. And I would go ahead and divide that by 3,600, but leave it in fraction form. Okay. Don't put it in decimal, because if you put it in decimal, you may get a different answer than the given answer, because you're going to round sooner than you need to. So we don't need to round until we're completely done. Okay, so here we go. We're going to find the secant, and remember, secant is a reciprocal of cosine. So then that means that I got 1 over cosine of this negative 3296 divided by 75. Oops, let me write that a little neater. Okay, all right, a little bit neater. All right. So when you type this in your calculator, I encourage you to type it in. It'd be easier to figure out what cosine of negative 3296 divided by 75. However, remember, don't use the minus sign for the negative. There's a negative sign on your calculator specifically to represent negative, not minus. So if you use the minus, you're going to get an error message. So I'm going to type the whole thing in my calculator, and I get 32.75. All right, and make sure you close your parentheses too. And we're going to round to, it didn't give a specific, but let's round to the nearest, let's round to the nearest 4th place, which is 10 thousandths. 1.3889. And if you notice, I put equals and then I put approximation because we're rounding, it's not exact. So this is my final answer right here. Number 9. Number 9 says, use the appropriate identity to find the cosecant for the given value. Well, we know cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Well, if sine is a negative 2/5, well, then I know that cosecant is a negative 5/5, or excuse me, 5/2. So that was, you know, and if you need to, I would write a note to yourself over here, 1 over sine, which is 1 over sine. Well, and they said sine here was a negative 2/5. I'm just showing you the algebra or the basic math. So we have a whole number and a fraction being divided. So let's rewrite it. Let's put it in parentheses because I want to recognize it's a negative sign, not a minus. And then since we have a fraction involved in division, we're going to use these rules: keep, change, flip. Keep the first, change multiplication, flip the second. And then 1 times that, it's a negative 5/2. So I showed you both ways, the shortcut and using mathematics to find your answer. So let's talk about number 10. So find the exact value of the following expression. So when you go to your unit circle and you find 11 pi/6, I get this point right here. You see it here? All right, so when we go there, we find that point. We need to figure out what is that order pair, what is going on. So when I look at it, I see that I get 60 degrees, right? And that gives me a 30 degrees right here. And I get 2 the square root of 3. And then this gives me an order pair of square root of 3, common negative 1. So this is just using, getting the information off the unit circle. And okay, so we know sine is y over r, right? And cosine is x over r. So we can figure out the best representation. So let's write it over here. Sine. And we're going to have 11 pi. Let's not forget to, on our notation, is y over r. Well, y is going to be the, look at our order pair here. We got y is negative 1, and my r is going to be 2, because remember, it's the longest side. So I know that so far, sine of 11 pi/6 is negative 1/2. Plus, now let's look for the cosine. Well, cosine is x over r, which is square root of 3 over 2. So now I got square root of 3 over 2. All right, so now we are going to add these two. But what we notice is that the square root of 3 cannot to be here. First things first, before I jump again. We got to have common denominators before we can add or subtract fractions. We have that, so good. So I'm going to rewrite this. I got negative 1 plus the square root of 3 over 2. Now this is exact form, okay? This would be my exact answer. You may see it written like this, but that'd be my exact answer. We can't put negative 1 and 3 together and get a nice clean answer. It's going to give me a decimal. So be careful, make sure and read the directions on what's expected as far as if they wanted a decimal or exact answer.